And, the eviction crisis is also has been growing for a while. One way to help avoid all of those evictions is to provide a right to counsel program. It can be funded by the city government or philanthropic organizations. And then often, it goes a long way towards stopping the evictions. Those attorneys can help the tenants access funds that they're eligible for, benefits they're eligible for, to help get true on their rents if they're behind on rent, and help them avoid getting an eviction on their record at all, which is hugely beneficial for renters to not have an eviction on their rental history. In Cleveland, in the first year of their program, 90% of those who had legal representation, 90% of those tenants had their eviction orders revoked. So again, very important for these families to not have the eviction order on their records, and they could only do that with the help of those attorneys. So this is something we could advocate for locally in our own cities and counties, to adopt a right to counsel program, or advocate for a statewide program. And then once a program exists, help make sure that tenants know about their rights and know how to access that legal representation when they need it. So that's one example of a strategy to prevent displacement in gentrifying communities. The other sort of category of strategies we talk about are strategies that are concerned with opening up exclusive, expensive, usually predominantly white, usually suburban neighborhoods to diverse residents. There's a lot of ways we could do that. Zoning changes, for one, subsidies, rental payment subsidies, or down payment assistance subsidies to assist families who've historically been excluded from those areas to live there. Inclusionary zoning, again, is another important strategy for suburban communities also. And ensuring that as we're building housing to meet the current, housing crisis, that we're building housing not only in lower income communities, but also in these higher income suburban communities. And when we build housing in those communities, making sure that we're building a full range of affordability types. Not only market rate housing, not only market rate and subsidized low income housing, but also middle income housing, because majority of African Americans make too much to fall into the low income category to be eligible for subsidized low income housing, but too little to afford market rate housing. So they fall in this missing middle category. And as we're building housing to meet the current demand, we have to ensure that we're building this missing middle housing to ensure that all families have access to live in these neighborhoods. So I talked about zoning changes. That's an important first step towards opening up these suburban communities to more diverse residents. Single family only zoning is the law of the land in most suburban communities. All of the residential land is zoned to only allow one house per lot. And in most residentially zoned areas in the country, 75% of residentially zoned areas is zoned only to allow one house per lot. Now, because of single family zoning, we're in the housing crisis we're in today, because that, by only allowing one home per lot, we've capped the amount of housing we can build as a country. And so as demand goes up, the housing supply hasn't been able to keep up. And so housing prices have just risen. Now, what you might not know is that single family only zoning came to prominence in the early 1900s, mid-early 1900s, when cities were told by the Supreme Court that they could no longer use racialized zoning. So cities used to zone their residential areas by race, saying this is a white zoned area, white residential area, and a Black residential area. They would write that into their zoning code. In the early 1900s, the Supreme Court said that was unconstitutional. So cities adopted single family only zoning in those white areas to do the same thing that racialized zoning did. By ensuring that only one house per lot could be built in those areas, it ensured the home prices remained high and only the most affluent families, which were the white families, could live in those areas. So as the first step towards diversifying those white segregated suburbs, we need to change the zoning to allow a more diverse housing type to be built in those areas with a broader range of affordability.